Hey guys, it's Mrs. Forson and I'm here with Mrs. Skelton, and today we're going to talk about the nitrogen cycle.
And our I-CAN statements for today is we can identify the biotic and abiotic fact elements, of the major biomes. We can describe how the biotic and abiotic elements within the biomes are connected. And our real-world connection is, of course, we use thinking and modeling to explain phenomena in our world.
So let's get started. 80% of our air in the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen.
You know what? I found that students were telling me that they believed it was mostly oxygen, and this is quite a misconception for them. They don't understand that it's really 80% nitrogen, not oxygen.
You know, Mrs. Skelton, my kids said the same thing, and if it wasn't oxygen, I got a lot of carbon dioxide.
Ooh, that's even scarier.
So I was wondering where those misconceptions came to. So I was really glad that we did our simulation that we had done and proved to them where the nitrogen is actually coming from.
Nice. Yes, that was extremely beneficial. Now, the other thing is, I like this next bullet point that you have about your body, that it does not use the nitrogen that you inhale. Guess what? I was really surprised that students thought we could inhale nitrogen and use it. I don't know where that came from either. And I thought, wow, if we could all inhale nitrogen, we'd get big really fast. And
maybe that's my problem. Maybe my body is inhaling the nitrogen, but
me too.
Who knows? But hey guys, so your body doesn't use nitrogen. You know, even though that you breathe it in the air because it's naturally out in our atmosphere, and you know, we walk through the atmosphere every day, so we technically, you know, we breathe in the atmosphere, but we're not using it. So your body is getting nitrogen though somehow, because you know, we do eat things that do rely on nitrogen for growth, like plants.
So what we're trying to say is that you get nitrogen through the food that you consume. It's not through breathing it in.
Very nice. Plants get their nitrogen from the soil that they grow in. And it's very vital that we have nitrogen-rich soil because, you know, especially right now, we're getting ready to head into spring where we're going to start seeing these farmers plant their fields. And we're gonna want those nice plant crops.
And a lot of times in the spring, our parents or grandparents are out there putting fertilizer on their grass because they also want to quick start that grass to get that nice green lush lawn for summer. I know that you probably know somebody who really has a nice lawn, and that comes from that nitrogen that they're putting on that. And we got to think about this too, and think about plants and living people. Plants are going to take in, they have to consume that nitrogen. They don't breathe it in either. So they have to take it in there with the rest of their nutrients through their root system, because that's how plants consume their food.
So even if you don't fertilize your yard, because I had that question a lot too, and they're like, well, how does my grandparents or my parents even, you know, flower beds look as nice as they do? And we talked about mulch and how mulch has a lot of nitrogen in it because of how nitrogen is, or how mulch is made up of manure and wood chips and how the ammonia had been extracted. So we use the example that if you looked in your backyard, where are the patches of grass really, really high and thick? And they said, you know, my students said, it's where our dogs go number 2 at. And I'm like, you're right. And why would that be? And I said, well, then let's contrast that because, you know, areas of your grass that are dead and dying, what happens there more? And they're like, that's where our dogs go number 1 at. So we had this nice conversation about taking the ammonia out. But we said, you know, even farmers are going to use ammonia in parts of their fields as well because that's going to do a different job. Right. But that's a whole nother topic because we're just talking about nitrogen. So we're going to stay on that. So we're going to talk about how many farmers are going to use that nitrogen in fertilizers to make their plants strong and grow quick and healthy. And both nitrogen fertilizers and forest fires. So even, you know, that composition of when we talked about Gatlinburg, Tennessee,
right,
and how the forest, yeah, there was burned down and burned down a lot, but they're still going to get good plant life back because of the nitrogen that was put out into the atmosphere at that point and soaked into the ground.
Exactly. And I know that some students brought up that during that time some carbon dioxide was released during that fire. Yeah, but so were other things, and nitrogen was one of those things released during that forest fire.
So what were we saying? Yeah, the forest fire was really bad. It was really awful, but it wasn't detrimental to our society.
Right.
It was detrimental to the area because that's people's luxury areas and vacation spots and leisure activities. But overall, environmentally, we're going to see some good things come out of it. And yes, some bad things came out of it as well.
And I think as we explore ecosystems a little more, we're going to see where fire plays a role in how some ecosystems function. They actually need that little bit of burn time to replenish and rebuild.
So we're going to look at this farmers using fertilizer a little more. With them spraying fertilizer on their fields, some of that fertilizer is going to get caught in the wind. Or sometimes they might use too much, and too much of it's going to go into the ground. So then it causes this problem. And sometimes it's not a bad problem, but sometimes it's a huge problem where our water is going to get too much nitrogen in it.
Absolutely. That is where we get concerned when we hear sometimes that creeks have had die-offs. And they go back and they track it back to the farm fields where they have fertilized quite a bit, or sometimes golf courses will over-fertilize. That fertilizer gets washed into that water system and causes a die-off. And then the EPA goes back and they track that back to the source of where that extra fertilizer came from. So it definitely, while it's positive, it makes things grow and become, keeps life going. It's negative if you have too much of it. It's a bad thing.
It's especially bad if they put too much in and your well is near them. Yes. When it gets down into your aquifers where you're getting your drinking water from, all of a sudden now you're getting these chemicals that, remember, your body doesn't need to survive from your drinking water, and that tends to be a problem. So Ohio has put in some regulations on our farmers now, so that way they can be more socially aware and more responsible with their fertilizing.
And while farmers are very much aware of the fertilizer problem, sometimes homeowners are not so aware of it, or golf courses, because when they over-fertilize, the way that they fix that is that they water it down. And so what happens is then that fertilizer, that nitrogen, gets soaked down into your groundwater. So it starts working its way through the soil to the aquifer, just as Mrs. Forson said.
So we gave you an example of a nitrogen cycle here. And the one thing I want to point out is my students really had a hard time grasping the concept that while it says cycle at the end of it, it's not cyclical. So it doesn't go in a complete circle like the water cycle does.
Yeah, I saw students when we were trying to draw it out. After we played the game, they tried to do their sketch, their diagram of it, and they were trying to put it in a circle. And I said, does that really work in a circle? Does that lightning work that way? It was crazy. So I said, I expect it to be all over the place with your arrows when you're working through this. And gradually they got it. I mean, it just was one of those things they started realizing, wait, okay, this goes to here, but if it goes to this spot, for example, if it goes into the plant and it's in the soil and the plant takes it up, oh yeah, well, great, then the animal comes along and eats that plant. Oh, now I get it. So they started seeing that it's kind of haphazard.
It is definitely haphazard. And in this picture, you can see there are multiple ways nitrogen is coming into play here. We have bacteria converting into the soil so that the way it's fixating on those roots to grow those nice plants. That cow is chomping on those plants because he is nice and hungry. Unfortunately, it looks like he might get a little wet there because there's a rainstorm coming in with some nice lightning. So we're going to get that nitrogen out of the lightning clouds. So guys, nitrogen cycle happens all the time. And within this picture, what I wanted to point out too is it's not a separate cycle from anything else. You know, in this picture, we could have just easily traced the water cycle in this picture as well.
That was one I did have a student yesterday that started noticing, because just the way their dice rolled in the game, that they were hitting the water cycle. It was going, you know, to the atmosphere, to the surface water, back. They were like, wait, this is just following the water cycle. And I said, well, why is that? And then they realized that, you know, nitrogen is this little element, and it's a particle that moves with whatever it's going to be part of. And I wanted to point out something too. When you're talking about that nitrogen fixing bacteria, that word fix is a root word for attach. That's what it means. So when you're thinking about that, think about that attachment piece.
So the process that's going to change that atmospheric nitrogen into nitrogen compounds that are usable by living things is called nitrogen fixation. And as Mrs. Skelton said, remember, fix means to attach. So as the nitrogen goes into the soil, it's going to attach onto the roots. And remember, the roots are what's going to keep those plants grounded. That's what's going to provide that plant with the enough support, with the enough water in order to grow big and strong.
And then when organisms die, you have that bacteria that's going to break down that organism. And that also helps break down all the things that are within that organism, all the elements. So it's going to help return that nitrogen from the tissues of the dead organisms back into the environment. So you'll see that breakdown. That it takes that little living thing to do that. That's really interesting when you think about it. And nitrogen also returns to the environment in the waste products of organisms. Poop is important, so cow manure is important. It's bringing that cow dumps that cow manure out onto the field, and that cow manure breaks down, that bacteria works on it, it brings it back into the soil. And by golly, we pull that out to make a lot of our fertilizers, especially if you're into organic farming.
Definitely into it. So guys, nitrogen is found in different forms as it cycles between the earth and its atmosphere. And we want to make sure you know that nitrogen is all around us at all times, and it is very vital for us to live and to keep going.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. This is Mrs. Forson and Mrs. Skelton.